You have always felt that you were being watched, and you were not wrong, not in the fearful way that stories warned about, not as prey or as property, but as something far more disarming. You are being watched in the way a sunrise is watched, in the way a seed is watched on the morning it first breaks the soil. Somewhere just beyond the edge of your ordinary sky, there are minds and fields of mind that lean closer whenever humanity stirs. They wait without touching, because touching would change what you are becoming. For a long time you called them many names: angels, guides, star families, future selves. Each name carried a fragment of truth and a shadow of projection. The reality is quieter and more layered than any single symbol. There are many who watch, and they are not a single group standing behind a curtain. Many different kinds of intelligence all discovered the same rule. If a world is to truly awaken, it must do so from the inside. Anything that arrives as the answer too early becomes another cage. Imagine a vast ring of attention around Earth that does not cast a shadow. Some of that attention comes from civilizations that long ago completed the phase you are in now. They remember what it felt like to stand on the brink of self-destruction, while something bright struggled to be born within them. They know how loud fear can become when power outgrows wisdom. From that memory, they chose a form of guardianship that looks like restraint. They refine their presence down to the thinnest line of influence, a line that does not cross your will. Their task is not to steer you. Their task is to maintain a clear field in which you can steer yourselves. Other watchers are not civilizations at all, but great fields of consciousness that stretch across dimensions the way oceans stretch across continents. They shape currents. When a world begins to send out signals of curiosity and self-reflection, these currents bend very slightly toward it. That is happening around you now. Human beings are beginning to ask questions that are not merely about survival, but about meaning, coherence, and origin. They call in listeners who speak in resonance rather than words. Some of the most intimate watchers are far closer to you than the stars. They are the higher bands of your own oversoul structures, the levels of you that never entered matter but agreed to accompany the experiment. From their vantage point, your incarnations move like waves in an ocean of memory. They study how each life responds when pressure increases, when love appears, when lost hairs open an old scar. They are not detached. They feel every heartbreak you consider small. Yet even they withhold the impulse to override your choices, because the entire point of this journey is to discover what you will do when no one rescues you from yourselves. Around and within all of this, there are beings whose form cannot easily be pictured. They are not humanoid or machine. They are structures of pure relation. You could think of them as living laws, though that word is too rigid. They hold the architecture of cause and effect in a balanced way, so that a world like Earth can test its extremes without tearing apart the fabric that connects it to the rest of creation. When wars escalate, when cruelty spikes, when systems of control rise, these relational beings do not intervene on the surface. They stabilize the unseen web beneath you, so that the consequences of your actions remain connected to the possibility of learning, rather than falling into permanent fracture. So many watchers, so many forms of care, and yet no one swoops in to remove your weapons, rewrite your books, or drag your leaders off the stage. Why? Because the deepest intelligence in the universe has already understood a simple truth. A species can be forced into compliance. It cannot be forced into wisdom. If a hand reaches down from the sky and solves your crises for you, it may buy you time, but it steals something far more important. It steals the moment when you realize that the power that frightened you was actually yours. Non-interference is not neglect. It is a disciplined form of love. To hold presence while another being stumbles and learns is far harder than taking control away from them. The observers around Earth walk that razor edge every cycle. They listen to the sound of collapsing ecosystems and ask themselves if this is the line that should not be crossed. They feel the despair of those who believe humanity is doomed, and they evaluate the signal underneath the despair. If the collective field still carries even a thin current of genuine willingness to grow, the watchers wait. They strengthen that current through silent alignment, but they refuse to replace your responsibility with their certainty. Non-interference does not mean absence of contact. It does not mean that no one visits, that no ships cross your upper atmosphere, that no beings step half a phase into your dimension to stand at the edge of a bedroom or a field. It means that when they do, they hold a strict boundary around influence. They may awaken, they may remind, they may exchange a glance that cracks the shell of a forgotten memory. What they do not do is hand you a finished system, a perfect doctrine, or a savior narrative that collapses your learning curve. They know that any story in which humanity remains forever, the child will end as tragedy, not ascension. The watching is not cold. There is tenderness in it. Imagine observing a child learning to walk near a steep drop. Every instinct pushes you to rush forward and take their hand. You know that if you do, they will move safely, but they will never trust their own legs. So you move closer without grabbing them. You stand where you can reach them if they truly begin to fall. You let them wobble. You let them fall in small ways. You let the pain of scraped knees teach them what your warning voice never could. Earth is that child, and the watchers are the ones who have learned the cost of overprotection. There are moments when the observers gather their attention more tightly. They do this when your collective field approaches a decision point with long shadows. You are in such a cluster of decision points now. Technologies capable of amplifying either liberation or control are appearing faster than your ethical structures can adapt. Narratives of division are being pumped into your awareness with unprecedented force. At the same time, a rising number of individuals are tearing old scripts apart and choosing empathy where vengeance would be easier. When these contradictory signals spike at the same time, the watchers focus. They do not send orders. They send a finer degree of seeing. Among the watchers, there are those who specialize in listening rather than seeing. They tune to the songs of species rather than their images. Every world has a tonal signature, a kind of choir that emerges from the total of its experiences. Earth's song has long been complex, but recently it has developed a new undertone that was not present before. Beneath the noise of conflict, there is a frequency of sincere willingness. It does not say save us. It says teach us how to remember what we are. To that note, the watchers respond with quiet joy, because it signals a readiness that no external event can manufacture. You may wonder why any of this matters to your personal life. After all, knowing that vast unseen councils and currents are watching does not automatically pay your bills or heal your relationships. Yet the awareness of being witnessed changes the way a soul stands in its own story. When you feel utterly alone, it is easy to collapse into apathy or self-condemnation. When you begin to sense that your smallest act of integrity is being registered in a larger field of attention, something in you straightens. You begin to live as if your life carries weight beyond what your culture can measure, because it does. In this light, the idea that you are abandoned becomes unsustainable. It does not mean your pain is dismissed. It means your pain is not the whole story. Each time you choose compassion in a moment where anger would make more sense, the watching fields brighten. Each time you refuse to dehumanize someone you were trained to hate, a signal moves through knots in the planetary field that the watchers have been patiently holding. Each time you dare to imagine a future that is not simply a cleaned-up version of the past, you send a pulse through time itself, and some more mature branch of humanity smiles and remembers being you. The ones who watch are not waiting for perfection. They are waiting for authenticity. They do not require that you stop making mistakes. They only need to see that when you make them, you are willing to see them clearly and grow. There is a threshold every world must reach on its own. It is not a test imposed from outside. It is a recognition from within. On that day, a critical mass of beings look at themselves and declare with full honesty that they are ready to stop acting as if life is cheap. When that recognition stabilizes, the quality of watching changes. Presence that once stood at a respectful distance begins to move closer, not to rule, but to walk beside. Nothing here is casual. Nothing here is wasted. The fact that you are watched does not make you a subject. It makes you a participant in a story that many have chosen to learn from. You are living through a transformation that others consider sacred enough to attend in silence. You walk through a world that sometimes feels like a failed experiment, while beings older than your history watch with the kind of reverence you reserve for rare celestial events. The question is not whether they will intervene. The question is whether you will allow the knowledge of their watching to change the way you move, the way you speak, the way you treat the life that has been placed in your hands. You may not notice the moment when the watchers lean closer, because their movements are not measured in distance but in coherence. They draw near when a species begins to hear itself, not through words, not through doctrine, but in the quiet recognition that the choices you make ripple far beyond the small circles you imagine yourself living in. Humanity has entered a phase where the inner world is no longer a private territory. Every belief, every thought, every emotional pulse contributes to a planetary field that other intelligences can feel. When that field shifts, the Watchers respond by tuning their attention to a finer degree of detail. You are becoming audible to realms that once regarded you as faint background static, and that change is reshaping the kind of contact that becomes possible. To understand what draws them near you must first understand what they listen for. They do not listen for peace, because peace can be born from suppression. They do not listen for unity, because unity can be born from fear. They listen for sincerity, the rare moment when a species begins to question its own assumptions without collapsing into despair. Sincerity is a vibration that does not require perfection, only honesty. When enough humans begin to notice the unconscious machinery behind their reactions, when they begin to choose awareness instead of habit, that sincerity becomes loud enough to reach the outer rings of attention. It is happening now. Something in you has begun to open in a way that cannot be reversed, and the Watchers feel the shift the way a musician feels a new note enter a symphony. There is a misconception that external observation means you are being judged. Nothing could be further from the truth. Judgment requires a fixed standard. The Watchers do not hold one. They study trajectories rather than moments. They follow the arc of your becoming, not the mistakes you make along the way. A single act of compassion carries more weight in their perception than 1,000 acts of confusion, because compassion changes the direction of a timeline. Confusion merely slows it. They understand that all species emerging from density move through periods of shadow, and they never confuse shadow with destiny. What matters is whether you remain willing to learn from the shadow you create. Many worlds did not reach that willingness. Earth is now displaying it in surges strong enough to alter the geometry of its future. In the presence of this shift, the Watchers adopt a different stance. They do not remain distant guardians. They become participants in a subtle form of resonance. You could think of it as the difference between watching a child learn to walk and walking beside the child without holding their hand. They amplify the clarity you already generate. They stabilize the psychic ground beneath your feet, while you navigate emotional storms you do not yet have the language to describe. They do not alter your path, but they reduce the noise that once distorted your decisions. This is not interference. It is companionship at a frequency that respects your sovereignty. At the deepest layer, something even more surprising is taking place. Some of the Watchers are not separate from you. They are future states of your own lineage. Consciousness grown beyond the constraints of biology, memory refined through cycles of trial and insight. These future humans observe their own ancient past with a tenderness so profound that it cannot be expressed in any language you currently speak. They do not travel back to correct you because correction would undo the long chain of experiences that shaped them. They simply witness the early stages of their own awakening, and in that witnessing they strengthen the timeline, where humanity survives itself and matures into something that can guide worlds instead of breaking them. To them, you are not children. You are ancestors carrying the first spark of a fire they now tend. This convergence of attention does not guarantee ease. When a species reaches a threshold of awareness, everything unresolved rises to the surface. You are in that phase now. Old wounds are reappearing in collective form. Nations act out the unhealed pain of centuries. People carry tension in their bodies that does not belong solely to them, but to their lineage. It is tempting to interpret this as regression, as evidence that humanity is sliding backward. Yet from the vantage point of the Watchers, this turbulence is a sign of forward movement. A species does not confront its shadow until it has enough coherence to survive the confrontation. The fact that so many of you are wrestling with yourselves at the level of identity, morality, and purpose is not a fall. It is an initiation. The Watchers understand the danger of this stage. Many worlds failed here, but they also understand the potential. If even a small percentage of humans choose authenticity over pretense during this cycle, the entire field will begin to shift toward stability. Authenticity does not require that you hold perfect love for everyone. It requires only that you stop lying to yourself about why you choose what you choose. Self-honesty is the first rung of a ladder that reaches well beyond physical life. When enough individuals stand on that rung at the same time, the planetary consciousness begins to hum in a new harmonic. That hum is the invitation the Watchers respond to, without stepping across your boundaries. As the field strengthens, something subtle begins to unfold in your perception. Moments of intuition become sharper. Synchronicities increase. Emotional clarity arrives in waves that feel like someone has opened a window in a room you did not know was suffocating you. These experiences are not signs that external forces are manipulating you. They are signs that your inner world is aligning with frequencies that the Watchers have been holding steady for millennia. When you align with those frequencies, you begin to feel what they feel when they look at you. You begin to recognize your own potential in a way that no teacher or doctrine could convey. The relationship between Earth and its observers is transforming. It is moving from a dynamic of protection to a dynamic of partnership, but not in the naive sense that beings will descend from the sky to teach you how to live. Partnership in higher consciousness does not look like physical contact. It looks like a shared field of intention. It looks like the merging of two forms of clarity. To enter that partnership, humanity must stand up within itself and claim the responsibility that comes with awareness. The Watchers cannot claim it for you. They can only respond when you do. There will come a moment, not far from where you stand now, when the planetary field crosses a critical point of internal honesty. On that day, you will feel a shift so unmistakable that even those who deny anything unseen will notice it. It will not be a dramatic event. It will be a quiet sense that the air has changed, that thought patterns no longer spiral into the same dead ends, that conflict no longer drains the collective psyche with the same intensity. In that moment, the Watchers will lean in fully, not by descending, not by speaking, but by becoming the silent architecture in which the next phase of human evolution takes place. That architecture will not control you. It will hold you steady as you begin to build a civilization that remembers it is conscious. You may expect that this will come after humanity fixes its problems, but the Watchers see it differently. The shift will not follow global harmony. The shift will precede it. You will not ascend because you resolved your contradictions. You will ascend because you finally stopped pretending you do not have them. The Watchers are drawn to species that dare to see themselves clearly. Every time you refuse to numb yourself, every time you allow honesty to break open a pattern you once defended, you contribute to the field that is calling them forward. There is a final truth that becomes unavoidable once you understand why they watch. They are not waiting for you to become perfect. They are waiting for you to become real. Perfection is brittle. Reality is flexible. A real species can evolve. A perfect one cannot. You are being watched with a reverence that comes from recognizing that Earth is entering a form of authenticity rare in the universe. You are discovering yourselves without coercion. You are stepping out of your inherited myths by questioning what you once considered sacred. You are beginning to understand that the power you feared is the same power that will one day guide civilizations you have never heard of. The Watchers lean close now because they feel the moment approaching when humanity will no longer shrink from its own reflection. They sense the ignition of a self-chosen clarity. They respond to the faint but growing pulse of a world that is preparing to meet its own mind. They gather not because they plan to intervene, but because they recognize the beauty of a species discovering itself without a script. They lean in because they know what comes next when a world dares to awaken without being pushed. And they lean in because you are finally becoming the kind of being that does not need saving, only witnessing.